themselves. But first I'm going to have Pastor Larry open us in prayer. Sure.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to you today. Lord, we thank you for this time of fellowship. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to bring your truth, Lord, to so many people all over the world. Lord, we ask that you watch over this broadcast today, Lord. Lord, give us the words you would have us to say, Lord. Let your truth shine through, Lord. Lord, let us work to help this family. We ask this in all things in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. Pastor Larry, you want to start, and we'll go around the table.
Hi everybody, it's me, Pastor Larry.
Hi, I'm Bernardo Malone, President of Justice for South Bend and a very close friend of Eric Logan.
Aisha Murray, Vice President, Justice for South Bend.
Jesse Davis, local activist and administrator of My Vocal.
Amen. The reason that we're all gathered here today is because of a shooting that happened to a black man here in South Bend. His name was Eric Logan, and we're going to have people give a little bit more background of who he was and the particulars of the show. This matter outraged me for a lot of reasons. When it happened under suspicious circumstances. The officers involved had a history here in South Bend. Officer Ryan O'Neill, and we'll go into detail. I just want to kind of sketch this out. And another officer by the name of Aaron Nepper. Now, before we start, I want to say this, and I want to make this very clear. We are not anti-police activists. I have several friends who are on the South Bend Police Department. I have several friends who've retired from the South Bend Police Department. I have stood up and spoken for officers, both black and white, before the Board of Public Safety. We have no intention of indicting the entire South Bend Police Department. I want to make that very clear. We are not anti-white. We are not against every man and woman in the South Bend Police Department. And I'm laboring this because a lot of times people will try and discount what we're saying and doing by saying we're anti-police activists or we're racist, we're anti-white officers. That's just not true. That's just not true. What has happened in this case is a black man, Eric Logan, was shot down under very suspicious circumstances. And I want to just lay out what my concerns are. There was a special prosecutor that had been appointed. He delivered his report last week. Many of us, in fact, I think everybody who was sitting around this table was there. And I pretty much came under the belief when I came that he was going to exonerate the officers because of the history that surrounds these type of investigations. There has been a 2004 state police investigation that was conducted that then Mayor Lickey sealed. There was a police investigation that was conducted, and we'll talk about these more, involving Chief Teachman and a black officer supervisor, Lieutenant Newton, and you'll hear that name again come up. That report was sealed, and it caused the head of the Board of Public Safety to resign in frustration. So we've been there before where we've gotten reports that have come out that have either been sealed or made unavailable, and folks have been exonerated that should have been. Chief Teachman was accused by Lieutenant Newton, and civilians that were there of failing to back up Lieutenant Newton. The mayor sided with Chief Teachman. So I just wanted to add that. I have in front of me the report on the death investigation of Eric J. Logan, Rick Hurdle, special prosecutor. Let me tell you, as I sat there, and I stood up, and I asked a question, because, Pastor Larry, I turned to Pastor Larry and said, let's go, when I asked this question. I'm looking at the report, And it says that Eric Logan, Mr. Logan, weighed 269 pounds and was 6'2". Okay, so, and that's on, and I'm reading from a public document. That's page 5, summary of Mr. Eric Logan's autopsy and toxicological report. He's 6'2", weighs 269 pounds. I then go to the Sergeant O'Neill's interaction with Mr. Logan. That's page 3 and page 4, and it talks about Eric Logan being according to Sergeant O'Neill, Mr. Logan did not comply with the order to drop the knife. Rather, Mr. Logan raised his knife, made a grunting noise, and began to advance towards Sergeant Logan. It didn't say he was running. It just said, while Mr. Logan started moving forward, Sergeant O'Neill backed away from Mr. Logan and ordered Mr. Logan to drop the knife many times. Mr. Logan continued to walk. Keep in mind, he's 6'2". He's walking, not running. Continued to walk. This is the report, the special prosecutor's report, to walk towards Sergeant O'Neill until he was backed up very close to the parked police car. Sergeant O'Neill indicated he was in fear for his life and fired 2 shots from his pistol at Mr. Logan. After the shots were fired, Mr. Logan stopped advancing, threw his knife at Sergeant O'Neill. The knife struck Sergeant O'Neill in the left forearm, resulting in a red abrasion. Okay, now I want to stop here because the special prosecutor indicates in his report that the bullet entered on a 30-degree downward angle. Folks, there's no way that Officer O'Neill could shoot Eric Logan, a 6-foot-tall man, on a 30-degree downward angle. When I heard that and I asked the special prosecutor, that can't be. And I talked to several current and former police officers, and all of them said to me the same thing. The only way he could have been shot at a 30-degree angle was if he was on his knees. That bothered me. Friday night, following the special prosecutor's press conference, where with the mayor in attendance at WUBS gospel radio station, the mayor had spoke just before I spoke, and the mayor said, in response to the questions from the Logan family, because the Logan family were asking for a do-over, and the mayor said, well, he said 2 things that struck me. First of all, he hadn't read the report, and if you remember, one of the Logan family members reacted rightfully so in outrage. You come here without reading the report. I read the report, and it took me less than a half an hour. Yeah. So she was totally justified that. The other thing he said was, he said, well, unless you come up with new evidence. And that struck me. And I don't know Mayor Mueller, and I certainly didn't want to display any disrespect when I got up to talk to him. But what I said was, there's no need for new evidence. The report shows, if you look at nothing else, the report shows Eric was walking towards Officer O'Neill. That's what their report shows. When he was shot at a 30-degree angle. That's inconsistent. That can't be. The report has to be wrong. He couldn't have been walking to Officer O'Neill. He had to have been shot on his knees. One of the officers that I asked about this, who was a law enforcement officer for 20 years, said O'Neill had to have been standing on a scaffold.
Yeah.
He had been standing on a scaffold with shooting at a downward angle like that. The only conclusion and then the report goes on to say the only blood they report was found on the white vehicle. O'Neill said that when he drove up, he saw legs hanging out of a dark colored car, and then when between those 2 cars is where the report says Mr. Logan was located. So if you just take their report and he's shot and the blood is on the white car, and if you The blood is at the lower portion of the white car, on the side of the white car. Are you tracking with me? That's what they said. So, if Eric is shot on his knees, that would be consistent with rubbing against the white car, if you look at their report. So I'm gonna stop here. I got a lot more, because there's a lot more to this. You have to understand that officers that are involved. You have to understand that if Sergeant O'Neill had been disciplined as he should have been, then he wouldn't have been there that night to kill Eric Logan. So I'm going to stop and just kind of throw it out to everyone else.
When you get to talking about the downward trajectory of the bullet that actually hit Eric Logan, you also have to look at the second shot. And when we examine that scene within hours after the police leaving, the dark-colored car, I believe they referred to it as maybe a black Toyota, that was there in the parking lot that Eric Logan was supposedly hanging out of. In the bottom rocker panel of that car, less than 12 inches from the ground, was a bullet hole, which had to have obviously been the second shot because the bullet that hit Eric Logan did not exit. So again, I asked the question about the trajectory of that bullet, because if you've got an officer who's roughly 5'8" and he is shooting at a man because he's in fear for his life, he's always going to be shooting as what they call, and they're trained to shoot center mass.
Exactly.
Which is in your chest area of your torso.
Exactly.
So if you've got a 5'8" man and he's aiming at a 6'4" man, his arms are going to be pointing straight forward, or maybe even at a bit of an upward trajectory.
Right.
So I asked, how do you explain the bullet hole in the rocker panel of this car that's less than 12 inches off of the ground? He would have literally had to have been pointing at a downward angle in order to get a bullet down there. And I didn't get any answer for that question.
And neither did I.
And it's not in the report either, technically.
The report on under Section 13, independent experts review of evidence and finding. Because I want people to know we're not just sitting here anti-police. You shot a guy. That's not what this is. Right. Okay. This is not emotion. This is facts. On page 18, Section 13, independent expert review of evidence and finding, the last bullet point said the bullet trajectory is downward at approximately 30 degrees. This trajectory is consistent with Mr. Logan being slightly bent forward. That could, even if he was slightly bent forward, as you say, shooting him center mass would not give you a downward trajectory.
Right, it would have been upward into the lung area.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been consistent with that. That's one of the problems. That's the biggest problem I have. Okay. Now, what I had a young man contact me on Messenger who said he's with a Logan family, and I had Dorothy Johnson, I think, who is the mother of one of the children, Eric Logan's children, and someone else, and I can't remember the name of the family, say, what are we going to do? Their frustration is so great now, because at the meeting Wednesday night, there were pastors there that called for prayer, and let me tell you something, the Word of God calls for justice. We're to love not just in word and lips.
Right.
Okay, so if Eric Logan is killed, his mother's sitting before me, and I'm a pastor, I'm just not going to say, I'm going to pray for you. I would pray for her strength, but God also requires that we do justice, that we seek justice. That we say, okay, after we pray to the Logan family, we're going to stand with you, and we're going to demand justice is done. Because our God is a God of justice. So that's why I'm involved. What happened clearly to me was a murder. Clearly, Eric was on his knees, murdered. 30-degree angle. This is what the report says. Now, from there, we get into all this other thing of the officers having a load and go, which the report says that the hospital was 0.8 of a mile from the scene of the shooting. If you look at the conclusion of the doctor that conducted the autopsy, he determined that the cause of death was Eric Logan bleeding to death. Now, I don't get how the hospital is 0.8 of a mile away, and he bleeds to death, less than a mile away from the hospital. I don't get that, and I'm very suspicious of who was involved in transporting the officer, which was Officer Nepper, which brings us into a whole different area, because Officer Nepper has a history, not only with black citizens. Officer Nepper and 2 other officers were involved in giving Jonathan Ferguson the Cinnamon Challenge. And all you have to do is Google that story. Jonathan Ferguson is a mid-20s young white guy who was a clerk at the time at the 7-Eleven on Miami Street, who thought these officers were friends of his. And what happened one night, he had noticed around 11 o'clock, he was a clerk at 7-Eleven, he had noticed a patron come in, smell of alcohol, and left. So he writes down the license plate number. Here comes Officer Nepper and 2 other officers, and he says, hey, that guy just left here drunk, do something. And they basically blew him off. Okay. The next day, he calls IA and files a report. Calls the police department and said they didn't want to do anything. So the following night, you see an officer and Mr. Ferguson said that officer comes in, before he gets in, he stoops down, takes some out of his pocket, buys Jonathan Ferguson's car, and does something. Jonathan doesn't know what it was at that point, but gets up, comes in, and says, hey, your tire's flat. Okay, so he files another report. Now, if you remember, Jesse, I don't know if you remember or not, we did a press conference saying that, hey, they stuck his tire. What came out of that was, no, it wasn't an officer, there was a juvenile that we investigated and locked up. Well, at that time, Mike Miller was on the sheriff's department. Mike Miller called JJC, and JJC said we didn't lock up any juvenile with regard to that. Okay, so this is just bad. This is bad, but it's bad because here we are now. The family is saying, what do we do? You can't go to the local NAACP because the president of the local NAACP has now accepted a job while maintaining his presidency of the NAACP as a diversity officer for the city.
Well, I think we need to be very clear on that as well. We know he's a local pastor
Also, right?
as well, but let's go back to the beginning when
Sure.
Eric got shot. The day before the verdict, local pastors met to come up with a plan. Me and Tyrese went to pass out WBS event the next night. My concern is these local pastors, not just with Eric Logan killing, but with the violence that's not out here in the community doing any work that the community can see.
Absolutely.
So that's just a concern with me as I started my organization when Eric Logan got killed, and I was a one-man person at that time. But still, throughout this whole ordeal with local pastors, there's been 2, 3 that's been out there in support. You have yourself, you got Pastor Williams, you have Pastor Watson. Those are the only pastors I've seen out in the community dealing with the Eric Logan case.
Well, and there's over 600 churches in South Bend. We've
South
talked
Bend.
about this a lot.
I blow this up on this
We
program.
talk about
every
this a
week.
lot. Over 600 pastors in South Bend. Okay, and certainly I take the task, the black pastors, but there are 600 churches here. Okay, I attended the ceremony for the 2,411 children that were aborted to bury them. Well attended. Where are those pastors at? Where are those? They called me and say, hey, we want you to come and do the service, the commitment for the 2,411 babies, which is terrible, and that's correct. But can we call them and say, would you stand with the Eric Logan family? And I'm talking about in addition, the Catholic Church, the priest there. The church itself has dropped the ball here completely. It shouldn't be 3 or 4 pastors. We have a.
I tear this point up every week on this show. There are too many pastors that like to do a lot of lip service. They won't get their feet on the ground.
The sad part that I see with this, and I've been around, I've been involved and recorded a lot of marches, peace rallies, you name it. The black community, Latino community, even whites. And 10 years ago, I walked the streets of the west side off of, oh goodness, what's the street up there by Fordage where the Martins was at?
Oh, Elwood. Elwood, right.
We walked the northwest side up off of Elwood, Huey Streets up there, Brookfield, because there were several shootings up there. Several local pastors that came out and marched. You know, they used to be involved in a lot of the things in this community. And what I've noticed is a lot of them have gotten involved with not-for-profits.
Right.
And they've gotten grants from the city.
Right.
And
Yeah.
after they receive these grants or they receive awards, it's almost like they're non-existent anymore. It's almost like they got, bribed or bought out.
Well, that's exactly what happened.
That's the sad part. That is sickening.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, I've marched with many of them. I've spoken to them. I've seen them out there over the last 10 years, but they're almost non-existent anymore.
Yeah.
And that's sad because the community is starting to see that and calling them sellouts.
Right, as well
You
as
know?
should, because Pastor Larry and I have done it. I mean, we have no problem doing it.
The other thing is you got a lot of community people right now that are asking one question that really needs to be answered. Several of these officers have had complaints filed against them by other officers.
Right.
They have things that were unsubstantiated supposedly, as well as things that were substantiated. If these officers would have been dealt with at the time when these things were going on, there's a very good chance that those officers would no longer be on the force and Eric Logan would still be alive, because if O'Neill was dealt with originally when several complaints were filed, chances are he shouldn't have been a police officer, especially when they were talking about racist things that he was supposedly involved in or said or whatever. So if he would have been dealt with appropriately from the get-go, instead of what people say, covering things up, he probably wouldn't have been a police officer. Eric Logan wouldn't have died.
And you know, I've got one of those reports. It was written on July 10th, 2008. It's signed by Lieutenant David Newton. And it says that on 7/11 at 03:20 hours, this officer was contacted by Corporal Lance, badge number 2051, about patrolman Hibbs, badge number 2152, wanting to have, O'Neill was a corporal then, he was a training officer, removed as his field training officer because of inappropriate racial remarks that were offensive to Patrolman Hibbs because the racial remarks were inclusive to members of his family. It was also learned with my conversation with Corporal Glantz that Corporal O'Neill had made inappropriate remarks to Patrolman Elwer when he was the field training officer for Elwer. Later in the shift, I talked to Patrolman Hibbs and told him I wanted to, that I heard he wanted to switch field training officers, and he was asked him what was going on. He would not talk to me at the time and told me he'd call me later after the shift and didn't feel comfortable talking about what happened. Later that day, I called Patrolman Hibbs at home and asked him why he wanted to change field training officers and what happened that offended him. Stated he was reluctant to talk to me because he feared repercussion from officers who were associated with Corporal O'Neill, because you are a lieutenant, I'm just a patrolman in training, and I know how these things work with these guys, and I have to work with these guys. There was so much pressure put. Now, Lieutenant Newton was, I don't think a lot of people know that, he started the Black Patrolmen's Unit also, and was forced out by Chief Wiskowski. So, Corporal O'Neill at the time was a training officer. And instead of disciplining him, Lieutenant Newton was harassed off the force. He ended up leaving the South Bend Police Department. He's now the chief investigator with the county prosecutor. But I want to read you something, and this came from an article. Again, this is not something, we're not sitting around bashing the cops and just throwing stuff up. This is all documented. On January 8th, 2020, Michael Harriet wrote an article called Mayor Pete's Invisible Police Department. And under the section, you can't have institutional racism without an institution. It says when Buttigieg became mayor in 2012, the South Bend Police Department was 11% black. 29 of the 244 officers. There were 28 officers in 2013. It dropped 1. 26 in 2014. It dropped 5. And by the time Buttigieg announced his run for president, the South Bend Police force was 6% black with 15 officers. So there's a, this is like, I don't even know how to explain it, because we talked about the incident with Eric Logan, then you kind of backed up and talked about how the black pastors were involved in protesting, and then all of a sudden they're getting grants and those kind of things, and it's like, where are they at? Okay, so that's an issue that you're concerned with. They're not on the street, okay? So then you look internally at the police department when an officer is this is basically a whistleblower saying, hey, this training officer, not just a patrol officer, a training officer is reported by 2 officers 2 separate times. And I remember looking at the news report, and I have it here, where the public affairs officer said when he was he went on the air and said that those reports, those IA reports, look like screenshots, because we posted them on my vocal. Right. And he said they look like screenshots and they weren't substantiated.
Right.
Well, there's a lieutenant that was a supervisor that brought them up.
And I think it's important to say on record that Lieutenant Newton also had filed a complaint on O'Neill from another officer that never got turned in, and just luckily Newton kept a copy of it on his flash drive. And when he went to ask where is the complaint I turned in, everybody said you must didn't turn one in, and lucky he had a flash drive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This continue to read from Michael Harriet's January 8th, 2020 article. He asked the question, so why were black officers leaving the South Bend Police Department? And he says, racism. He said, this is not my opinion. He said, what black officers specifically repeatedly told the South Bend Common Council, we got to ask people like Sharon McBride and Karen White, who I think is over the Public Safety Committee, okay? And I know Officer Davin Hackett, I've talked to him several times, he was upset because he continually went to the Common Council and City Legal and complained about the racism. And so in his article, he said, this is not my opinion, it's what black officers specifically repeatedly told the Common Council, the Board of Public Safety, which is led by Pastor Eddie Miller, a pastor, and Mayor Pete, in memos, emails, and complaints obtained by the Root and TYT. The claim is reflected in 5 discrimination lawsuits filed in federal courts by black officers. And one was a female officer, Joy Phillips. The accusations were leveled by current and former officers. There was a document signed by 10 black South Bend police officers, 10, which describes several problems. The letters were sent 2014 to the Board of Public Safety, the mayor's office, and the city legislature. They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything.
I think people would be honestly shocked if someone did the research and came up with the actual numbers of suits that have been filed against South Bend, a lot of them by black officers, and number 2, by the number of complaints that have been filed to, I guess it would be the EEOC and whoever the reporting agencies are where they file their complaints by officers, because you mentioned Davin Hackett, and there was also, I believe, Theodore Roberts.
Oh, that's an interesting.
Was another officer who had came to the Public Board of Safety, I think, and also the council numerous times. And, you know, the other thing that I have a big problem with is anytime anybody from the public wants to really, you know, look into these issues, we hit a dead end. We hit a brick wall because we're always told, oh, that's part of the personnel record.
Yeah.
That's how they protect these guys.
Right.
And keep this stuff from the public's view and even from the news media.
Right.
Is, you know, well, we can't discuss that. It's public record, or it's under investigation. Then when the investigation's over, you also get, oh, it's part of their personnel record. We can't give that to you.
You know what's interesting, and I'm reading, continue to read out this article, South Bend black officers had 5 basic complaints. White officers regularly received promotions, transfers, and positions that were not publicly advertised to black officers. Black officers were rarely promoted. Now think about it. I want you to think about this. I know Sam Diggins. Sam Diggins has been on the police department. I remember either early 80s, late 80s, or early 90s, 90, 91. So he's been over 20 years. Sam's a sergeant, okay? Nate Cannon, sergeant. Chuck Stokes, I talked to Chuck before he retired. He said, you know, he was a training officer. He said, I trained just about every division chief. I trained every sergeant up and everybody up to division chief. After almost 30 years, he retired as a sergeant. I mean, and they also go on to say white officers were selected to fill temporary positions with the department's black candidates applied for permanent. The white ones were told they already had the advantage because they already had done the job. White officers not back up black officers when they're in danger and need help. Of course, that brings us to
glad you
teachment.
said that too, because we know from he left, went to Elkhart.
Davin Hackett.
Yeah, Hackett. You know, he was over on a call, I believe, Chicago Street
Mhm.
or Sheridan, early morning, and he radioed a 10-1. He didn't ask for assistance. This is the difference. Asking for assistance and calling out for a 10-1. A 10-1 means like life is in danger, and no officer responded to that call to help him.
Well, then we have this case where, you know, Lieutenant Newton, and again, it's in the article here, which confirms the Teachman incident. Of course, Buttigieg replaced Teachman, or replaced Boykin with Chief Hurley, and we know that Hurley had been fired in 2005 from his job at the University of Notre Dame, assistant director of security, for a cover-up. And of course, Theo Robert also said that he wasn't even a certified police officer. Okay.
Which Mr. Hurley actually verified that when he tried to jump into the sheriff's race to mix things up because they didn't want Redmond as sheriff. When he did his announcement, I went live streamed and recorded, and I specifically asked him why he was fired from Notre Dame, and I also asked him if he had the proper ILE certification to be the chief when he was appointed and served almost a year as the chief. And he reprimanded a lot of officers, and maybe even terminated, some might have left. And he specifically said, well, with my experience, I didn't think it was necessary for me to go down and get that certification renewed. And I specifically asked him if another officer wanted to be the interim chief, would they in fact have to have that to be the chief? And he said yes, but he didn't feel he needed it. So, I mean, you know, and you look at that, you're talking about Officer Newton. I'm assuming you're talking about the situation
April
where they had
22nd,
a fight
2013.
at the Charles
Martin Luther King
Martin
Center.
Luther King Center. It was also said by some people at that center that after the fact, officers came to that center and tampered with the video recording equipment, erasing the video that would have shed some light on that incident with Chief Teachman.
There were approximately, I'm reading this article, April 22nd, 2013, when you're talking about, there were approximately 50 people in the parking lot engaged in a fight, Newton told the common council. And I don't know if they had weapons or not. Newton called for backup, other officers were dispatched on calls, other calls, okay? So again, it's consistent, no backup. So Newton pulled out his gun, broke up the fight without hurting a single person. Chief Teachman never came outside. He was there with me, never came outside. In South Bend Police Department, this is simply a dereliction of duty. It's a violation of duty. But because they knew how South Bend worked, Newton and his fellow officers didn't say a word. Newton didn't file a complaint, but a black pastor who witnessed the event spoke up. He spoke to Buttigieg about it. However, according to the witness, Buttigieg had no answers, did not want to hear what I asked or had to say. It ended up in front of the Board of Public Safety, who voted to ask the ISP, Indiana State Police, to look into it. Then, according to the Board of Public Safety President Pat Cottrell, and his handwritten journal, Buttigieg fired a city attorney for failing to kill the Indiana State Police investigation, which Buttigieg denies. And then when the state police handed its results to Buttigieg, the mayor decided not to discipline his new chief, who is, of course, Teachman, and refused to release the ISP report, as you said, citing personnel matters. And he claimed the investigation was instigated by people who wanted to take a mountain and make it into a molehill.
If you really want to know how deep this runs, the ISP investigation, they came and talked to Reverend Greg Brown. Greg Brown called me and said, Jesse, the state's coming here to talk to me about this investigation. He said, would you mind coming and sitting in? So I went and sat in and recorded the questioning that went on with Reverend Brown. Reverend Brown was also aware that the recording devices had been, tampered with, whatever, and erased. I also had launched some investigations with the state police at the Bristol Post. I had dealt with a particular detective for a couple of years, ongoing. I went down there one day because the detective notified me and said, Mr. Davis, we want you to put your evidence on an external drive and bring it down here to us so we can store it somewhere off of your premises. My wife got really nervous because she was like, well, why would they do that? Are they worried, somebody's going to come do something to you? So I actually put several gigabytes worth of evidence onto a flash drive and drove to Bremen, met with the same detective. We went into what I call a small interrogation room. It was recorded. When I walked in the room, there was another gentleman sitting across the table, and he had a notepad, and he had a button-up shirt and a tie on. He stood up and introduced himself as Agent so-and-so from the FBI. So I had about a 2-hour conversation with this FBI agent and the state police detective about corruption that was going on in South Bend, and we were going over the evidence I had given up to them. Mind you, I had already previously went to the FBI building downtown and given them evidence of some other corrupt things. So the whole point of this is when we got done, the FBI agent left. Me and the detective got up and walked outside of the interrogation room. The detective flipped a switch or something, turned the recording device off and said, "Hey, we're off the record." This state police detective looked me dead in my eyes and said, "Mr. Davis, I brought the FBI into this because your prosecutor," which at the time was Mike Dvorak, "your prosecutor has called more than 3 times trying to thwart this investigation." Now, mind you, this is an investigation over criminal activity and corruption within the city with high-ranking city officials. And this detective told me that our own prosecutor, who we elected, was trying to stop this investigation. That's what we run into here in South Bend. That's why people are so upset about the way things happen around here.
And just for the record, the report said everything started in the parking lot. But the 911 call said that it was a blue car parked on William Street was getting broke into. It's odd because that blue car, we interviewed a guy who owned the blue car. He said South Bend police woke him up around 4 o'clock in the morning and told him to say that a black man had broken into his car, had a knife, a purse, and a radio.
And you told the special prosecutor there today. We were sitting there, and he like, "Oh, you know, it's
Right, and I said, how can you say that? Because I talked to you personally
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
Once we got home, my video was taken off from Facebook. But how do we trust the South Bend police? Even at the 3 o'clock meeting, when Scott stood up, he said, yeah, the chief. He said, "I want to clear up, I never said about some bullets, casings." And I stopped him and say, "Yes, you did." And he promised we would hold a conversation. That conversation haven't happened yet. But the night of the Eric Logan family coming into the mayor's office at 10 p.m., I do media and I'm part of the family, so I was allowed in there with the family. Scott, in his own words, said, I asked, when you have a grieving family,
Right.
they're not listening, they're not really in tune. So I asked, I said, how many times was Eric shot? He said, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you the rumor of 15 times is untrue, and these are his words. He said, I can tell you that the officer revolver is missing 2 rounds, and it's concerns because there's no cases at the scene. At that time is when Tree said, I'm gone. Eric brother walked out and said, there won't be no cameras or anything. At that time, the chief, Clifford Bonds, Eric's other brother, was recording, and he asked him to turn off the recording, which if you go to my Facebook, you will see that video as well. So I have a problem with the chief. You lied to the Eric Logan family the night of. Now you want to clean it up to the public, saying you didn't say this. So you got the Logan family hearing you say this. You have me hearing you say, you asked for the recording to stop. Why would you want the recording to stop? And then when O'Neal resigned, if you remember, he said he resigned because of pressure on Facebook
Yes.
over the Logan case. But we heard him say at the meeting that he knew of this prostitution thing when he resigned. Why you didn't just come out and say there's an officer, maybe investigation for prostitution? He didn't have to say O'Neal's name, but you knew of this and you knew O'Neal was a part of it. And you want their community to trust you? I don't trust him. I don't know about you, but I can only speak for myself.
I think there should be, there's reasons not to trust him. I mean, he's the chief, I think 2015, I looked it up, he was appointed chief by the chief, so 5 years. And in that 5 years, now granted, the write-up that I read you, because I want to I always want to be accurate. The IA report, I believe, was written in 2008. This is not on Chief Wiskowski. I want to make that clear. This was in 2008. This was during the time that Chief Wiskowski was not the chief. He became chief in 2015. My point in reading this was, I would think, if you're reviewing, they only had 244 police officers. He was an officer then at that time. Because I remember we used to go to city county buildings and he was a lieutenant. We'd stand there, he'd stand outside the door at city council. So he was aware, certainly, as a supervisor of O'Neal, but he allowed O'Neal to stay in the police department. Those are the issues. You know, the other thing, and I didn't know this until, this is an article from The Intercept dated December 5th, 2019. And I didn't know this at the time, but this is an article, and it says, a South Bend police officer was involved in the controversial 2012 death of a man in police custody, was promoted in October at the recommendation of Police Scott Wiskowski. And of course, this man was Officer David Johnson. Johnson's promotion to sergeant and special assignment was recommended by Wiskowski and approved by the city's Board of Public Safety, whose members are appointed by the mayor. Of course, Eddie Miller now is the president, a pastor, black pastor. Okay, in 2012, Johnson, another officer, when I mention his name, you're gonna know if you don't remember, Chase Michael Anderson, who was a suspect, was suspected of stealing a moped on foot. Anderson fled to police, was ultimately apprehended and found to be choking on a bag of drugs and some cash. As Anderson sat handcuffed, Johnson went back to his squad car, returned with a plastic Slurpee-like straw, which he then put down Anderson's throat in an ill-fated attempt to retrieve the drugs. Anderson died at the hospital later that night, a death that was later ruled accidental. And following an investigation, the county prosecutor concluded Anderson died based upon his own actions, and at the time activists called for St. Joseph County Metro Homicide Commander Tim Corbett and Lieutenant David Wells to step down over allegation they mishandled the investigation. So, I mean, this is a case, again, where an officer was involved in a death and Chief Wiskowski promoted him. But we go back to, and I want to go back to this article, Mayor Pete's Invisible Black Police Force, where it says, Nate Cannon is a black police officer in the South Bend Police Department, and I know Nate, most of us know Nate. When he retires in March of 2020, he will have served 40 years. A sergeant. That's 40 years. Cannon works in the city's detective bureau, and during his years, his superiors rated his performance as satisfactory or better. For more than 20 years, Cannon and other black officers watched while white officers with less seniority or qualifications were promoted to rank of lieutenant while he continued to hold the rank of sergeant. This is insane. In February 2004, the South Bend Police Department notified all its officers there would be an opening for day shift lieutenant after retirement of another black officer. was a black woman apparently. He said no one expected Cannon to get to the position, not even Cannon. He didn't even apply for lieutenant day shift. The black officers knew the position belonged to Marcus Wright. Marcus Wright was black. He was already lieutenant. As the department's afternoon shift lieutenant, he was already doing the exact same job. Plus, everyone knew Wright wanted to transfer to day shift. Wright was considered a shoe-in, despite what Cannon and Wright would later call the South Bend Police Department's long history of desperate treatment between black officers in terms of denying promotions to qualified black officers. Knowing this, Cannon and other black officers who languished in the department without a promotion didn't even bother to apply. A few white officers submitted applications, but everyone thought the job was Wright's. Cannon's plan was to apply for the afternoon position that would be left vacant by Wright's promotion. That was supposed to be a routine promotion. Instead of granting Wright's transfer, Teachman told him he would have to interview the job in front of an interview panel. The man was already a lieutenant, along with less senior white officers. This was typical procedure when someone wanted a promotion, but Wright was already a lieutenant. He essentially just wanted to change what time he was going to work. Marcus Wright didn't get the job. Not only was Wright forced to go through a promotion process that he had already completed because he was a lieutenant, Teachman promoted 3 officers to shift lieutenant. Unbeknownst to Cannon, Wright, and the other black officers, Teachman had created 2 additional lieutenant positions, including head of the newly developed gang intervention unit. Okay, the chief had filled all 3 positions by promoting 3 white officers, a job that black officers didn't even know existed. I mean, there's a lot going on here. I mean, Eric Logan, to me, it's like a polluted river has all come together in this big pond to get us to Eric Logan. Okay, pastors not being active and involved in demanding justice. The city council members sitting on their hands. I mean, if Friday, after the special prosecutor's announcement was made, and I saw Gladys Muhammad, who I've known Gladys, and Gladys has told me they're forcing her out of her position, so she's trying to hold on to her job, and she'll say whatever they have to. I mean, I'm just telling you the truth. I mean, she's trying to.
See, I was told they're getting rid of a lot of people. I'm assuming you're talking about Heritage Foundation.
Well, Heritage Foundation, because they don't have any money.
They don't have any money. They're going broke, and right when I heard that they were going broke, then I hear about the city infusing them with $1.5 billion for another project, and we were really thankful with the apartments they provided for 32 homeless people
for $6 million.
But I went and had a problem and even spoke with Marco Mariani from Heritage about why it cost us $6 million for 32 units. That's over $250,000 per unit.
To buy a house,
So, but that gets into a totally different realm.
Absolutely.
But a lot of this, you think about it, and it ties and wraps us right back around to another big elephant in the room, which is the South Bend police tapes.
Yeah.
The biggest issue that a lot of people have had with those tapes is, number one, supposedly there was possible criminal activity of police officers discussed on those tapes. And there was also supposedly and possibly racist comments made by those police. So we've been chomping at the bit trying to bring forth the racist demeanors within the police department with bad officers or supposed bad officers to bring that to light and do something about it. And we've hit a brick wall every time. And so now here we are, we're talking about, an officer who's been accused numerous times of racist actions.
Gets promoted.
That got promoted. An officer that was accused of racist actions, if he'd have been dealt with, wouldn't have been on the force to kill a man, which has now created more huge racial tension in our community. So, I mean, we need to get to the bottom of why are we protected? Why are these racist people being protected on the police department? You know?
And even though if you filed a IA report, as you guys saying, I filed one on the body camera. I was a victim a week after Eric Logan, exactly a week. Sergeant Daly bragged about having his video camera on. I filed an IA report. That's when Lieutenant Herron was over IA. He told me he was gonna make sure everything was done, but he didn't have me sign my name on the complaint. But he said he took the complaint. I'm asking for the video of that interview now. But it come back that Sergeant Daly told IA we was friends, worked at 2 different places. So I asked for a re-investigation to prove we never worked together and we never been friends. And you know what the outcome was.
Well,
The case was closed.
Now, it's funny you mentioned Sergeant Daly because there is a YouTube page called Freedom to Film. And this gentleman goes out and randomly films police incidents, you know, where the police are dealing with the public, basically to make sure that there's accountability and, you know, things of that nature. And Sergeant Daly has been seen and also mentioned by name in several of these videos where this gentleman is in a public place, he's doing nothing but shooting video, he's not interfering, and Sergeant Daly gives this guy a hard time verbally in some cases and shines a flashlight, a bright flashlight, into this gentleman's camera on a regular basis.
it doesn't
Nothing get this.
Now, we're gonna go back in a couple minutes. We're gonna go to the studio for a 4 o'clock break. Are you guys gonna be able to continue next hour, or?
No, we have our event in Ben Harbor.
Okay, so you got to go.
But we thank you for
Okay,
having
well,
us.
thank you for being here, and just know that what I think, when you talk to the family, I think the best thing to do, Dorothy Johnson contacted me, and she's trying to get signatures, and I know Black Lives Matter are trying to get signatures to call the Department of Justice in. The best thing to do is involve the Department of Justice quickly before we go to studio. I want to tell you why. There's a federal civil enforcement. It's called the Police Misconduct Provision. It's 42 U.S.C. Section 14141, and the type of conduct covered in this law include, among other things, excessive force, discriminatory harassment, false arrest, coercive sexual conduct, and unlawful stops. This would be, and the DOJ would come in. So you have the law here. I encourage you, and we're going to help also. We have to get justice for this family. This is wrong. This is a murder and a conspiracy. We're going to go to studio now, and we'll come back at the end of the news break. Much more. Yeah, and when we come back after the break, stay tuned. We'll kind of lay out more. So, this is incredible. Thank you guys. We're gonna get it. I'll get you guys a copy of this video.
Okay.
We're gonna blow them up.
Got you.
Because see, like I said, this goes 177 countries, so they can't squash this. We're gonna get it out.